In the next hour, we want to talk about title deeds. And someone is here to tell us that title deed is the most useless document in a land buying transaction. Can you imagine that? Ready title is the most useless transaction document
in the land buying process.
Anyway, before we welcome Solomon Wangwe to the show, let us hear the day's proverb city.
Yes, Proverbs. Including this one is still from the country of Libya.
Mm-hmm.
He who keeps the company of dogs will bark.
He who keeps the company of dogs will bark. Okay. We hear that. Solomon Wangwe is the founder and managing director of Goshen Acquisitions Limited. Good morning, Solomon.
Good morning.
Welcome to the hot seat.
Thank you.
It's been a long time. It's been a long time coming.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Karibu sana.
Most
that
good.
proverb from Libya. What do you make of it?
African proverbs have a way of playing with words that make them very interesting. To me, it sounds like the reverse version of birds of a feather flock together.
Indeed. It is, eh? It's like starting from the very beginning.
Right.
If you flock together, then your feathers will be the same.
Will be the same.
Will be similar.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Tell us about Goshen Acquisitions. What's Goshen Acquisitions? What do you acquire? Who acquires you? What is it all about?
That's a good question. So Goshen Acquisitions is a land trading, buying and selling company, founded in 2012. As a result, I call it a happy accident. We never intended to get into the business, but were forced by unexpected circumstances to start. And unlike what the name may suggest, we're simply in the business of providing safe land investment opportunities for Kenyans, both here and abroad.
Okay. So you don't just acquire land, you also sell.
Yes.
If someone hears Goshen Acquisitions like, these guys, let them into your home. Next thing, home gone.
No, not Goshen auctioneers. No,
not
Goshen Acquisitions. We only sell what we own. I know it's been a growing business model because of the problems in the industry, but that's a decision we made from the very beginning, that we would never represent someone else's interest as a broker, a third party. We only wanted to sell what we owned. Therefore, we could stand behind what we were offering, being sure of the history of ownership, the provenance of the documentation, and that sort of thing. The acquisitions are necessary. If we're only going to sell what we own, at some point we have to buy inventory, if you will. That's where the name came from. It's a little bit deeper than that, but
Delve into the depth a bit so that we get it.
Yeah. Well, 2009, I came back home from the US, where I'd been living for 11 years after high school, like many in my generation. I came back to settle back home and struggled to find my place in this new Kenya. Remember when I left the late President Daniel Moi?
The previous century, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
I found a very different Kenya because I'd been away for a 10-year stretch. And there was this big craze around buying land and selling land, and the gains, the capital gains that people were, having circle back when they sell. And I was interested in that because I had a few coins in savings. My wife and I had very little in savings at that point because I was unemployed. I just come back home, and a friend we met in church, her name is Rose Muyu. I'll shout her out because if it wasn't for Rose Muyu, we might not be here today. She shared an interesting story about how at the age of, I think she was 42 at the time, had not earned any more than 45,000 shillings a month, and yet she was worth tens of millions of shillings in land and property. That piqued my interest. So I reached out to her and asked her to mentor me because I was scared of getting conned from all the stories you hear. And she said yes. I set about looking for land with her guidance. We found one. Unfortunately, it cost a lot more than the 150K in savings that I had at the time. And unexpectedly, a group of friends and family that used to meet once a week from church, they used to call them life groups. We used to attend Mavuno at the time. Unexpectedly offered their financial support to allow me to purchase this piece of land from their savings account. I literally spent the next day driving to everyone's home and office collecting cash and so on. I happily paid a deposit the next day, and I called Rose. She helped me figure out how to raise a balance by pre-selling land to people who wanted to buy, but like herself, were very apprehensive about starting the process. They don't want to get conned. They don't want to buy the wrong thing. And the assumption was that since Rose knew me, then I was relatively trustworthy, right? So we ended up pre-selling a good chunk of that land to raise a balance. And it's at that point, a good friend of ours, a lawyer who helped us with that transaction, said, listen, if you're going to do this again, you need to register a company for efficiency and that sort of thing. And therefore, Goshen Acquisitions was born. And that name is inspired by the story of Joseph in the Bible, where, his father and his clan were given the best of Egypt, which was the land of Goshen, by the Pharaoh as an act of favor to Joseph, his number two. And it says that in Goshen, they lived, acquired land and property and prospered. And so that's what we envision Goshen Acquisitions being. We eventually created a trademark later as a result of a brand audit, because a lot of people like yourself, you hear Goshen Acquisitions, people think we're advocates who are involved in mergers and acquisitions and that sort of thing. And out of that, Grand Acres was born as a trademark. Because that's a bit more obvious, the name, and that's a customer-facing brand of Goshen Acquisitions.
Grand Acres.
Yes.
Okay. Now, we are going to have an interesting conversation today. When people think, just like when you were buying that first piece of land, you were very much interested in knowing first the true owner of this piece of land. So you do going to the land registry and checking and finding asking for the mother title or the title deed, and looking at the title deed and seeing whether the name corresponds with the person that you're dealing with. And It's the same thing with people who are coming to buy from you. They wanted to know exactly who owns this piece of land. And the reference point is the title deed. And here you've been saying recently that the title deed is the most useless document in a land buying transaction. What on earth do you mean?
It sounds alarmist,
Very.
Understandably.
It sounds inflammatory.
Yes, it does. We've received many unfriendly comments from all sorts of people from many corners, particularly the legal fraternity. But it's a statement I will stand by. It's a fact, and I know a lot of fuss is made around titles, because even us in the business, when we want to market and sell something, the first thing you'll see in our advertising is clean title, ready.
Clean, ready title.
Right. What does clean title mean? And we have learned, over the last 10 years since we started, it's almost 11 years now, that that document is really quite literally the most useless, and I use the term most useless intentionally to provoke people to think about what I'm saying, and it was stated in context. Obviously, a title deed is important, otherwise you have no point of reference with bankers and lawyers and that sort of thing.
And claim of ownership.
Well, that is debatable. It's one of the reasons I made that statement. Yeah. And in the context of a land transaction, there are much more important documents. They do, in fact, give life to the title deed. Therefore, it is, someone said maybe you should have said it's the least important. as opposed to the most useless. Semantics, but I think the point was made that document, as much as we flash it around as land and property marketers, is far less important than a bunch of other documents behind the scenes that most people have no access to, don't know they exist, that give life to that title deed.
And what are those? What are these things that we are not seeing? Because everybody is thinking about the title deed. It's the title deed that you run around. It doesn't have a title. And the importance or the emphasis that is placed on that particular documentation, I'm sure you know, it's huge. So, and then if that's the case, then why does everybody put so much emphasis on it if it is not as important?
Well, I think the emphasis is placed on that because it's what people see. It's a recognizable emblem image. I actually brought a couple to the studio for demonstrative purposes. But, you see that document with the red seal, and it gives you a feeling that this is legit.
Yes.
It's ready to go. But, there's a raft of other things behind that document. Before that title deed is typed, registered by the Ministry of Lands Registry. For instance, the green card is far more important than a title deed. And in many cases, it's a literal green manila card that sits in a file at the registry. And the lock and key, very limited access to it. It'll typically contain history of ownership of that property from when it was produced. And the reason I say that is because if you're dealing with something that was subdivided last year, the green card to that title will only go back to last year. But the last entry in that green card will tell you its linkage historically. Therefore, it was a subdivision of a particular mother parcel, which also has a green card, and those will go all the way back to 1963. Where I've seen some as old as 1952, especially for CBD, and it'll tell you from the Queen of England to the government of Kenya to such and such a company was charged to a bank. There was a fraud case involved. The fraud case was sorted out and that sort of thing. It was subdivided by such and such and sold to the next person. That document, I like to tell people, is akin to a birth certificate. So all of us adults in Kenya carry an ID card. To me, that's a symbol of a title deed. The ID card is important because it allows you access to services and places. But that ID means nothing if there's no file at the Registrar of Persons containing your birth certificate. And so the green card is what gives birth to the title deed. And there's a few other documents between the green card and the title deed, like the registry index map, the mutation form, if it was subdivided from a larger parcel. There's land board consents.
Okay, hold on.
Yes.
So now, then, I've actually now been able to put it in context because you're talking about in land buying transaction. Okay. So now let's talk about that land buying transaction. Take us from the very beginning, from the moment now I come to you and you tell me, oh, I've got a piece of land here, and then what those documents are and their importance.
Right.
In that whole journey up to the point where tumemalizana na wewe, I have my title deed.
Yes.
Because I still want to have my title deed.
Yes, it's important. So, a few years ago, we started a YouTube channel on the how-to process, just to demystify. It's not rocket science. A primary school kid could follow that process on their own if given the information. Okay. It's just not accessible. And that information was shared in the context of when, for instance, when we're buying. Because we have to buy in order to have something to sell. And so we advise our customers, and even if they're not our customers, because we can't service every single investor in Kenya, at least not yet. That's the aim. But even when you're buying from someone else, these are the things you should look out for, which is a process we follow. Number one, have an advocate, licensed advocate of the High Court of Kenya to help you. Make sure they're licensed when you engage them. Just because they call themselves a lawyer does not mean they're necessarily licensed to practice for that year. And there's things you can do to ensure that they are licensed.
Now, why are you insisting that they must be licensed?
Because of liability.
Meaning?
If you, in the process of your transaction with that advocate, find yourself getting defrauded, mistakes are made that jeopardize your ownership, money is lost, and that advocate is not licensed, then you're left hanging because they should not have been practicing in the first place.
So what if I go through that process myself and do not involve a lawyer?
Well, I would never recommend that. It's
Right, but what would happen?
well, chances are, unless you have studied law, you will make grave mistakes along the way.
Okay. Why is the study of law so important in a transaction that you said was simple, straightforward, a primary school child could actually carry it out?
Well, so when I say a primary school kid can carry the process out, I'm referring to the due diligence, step 1, 2. Now, we're just talking about drafting legal documents. That's a different thing. And that's step number 1. Tell the primary school kid, go and find a licensed advocate to help you.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sticking on this point. You know, I'm sticking on this point.
Yes.
Land transaction, Solomon, is land transaction. Are they not generic ways of simply ensuring that that transaction follows laid down procedure? Now, there may be details which are specific to the transaction that you have, but the where to fors and there and tos and all that, are they not just the same thing?
Yes, I suppose you could say that, but you would need to invest a lot of time and effort to know what those are in the first place, you know, which is what they go to school for 4 years, do pupillage, and get admitted to the bar for. So why do that? If you have the time to do so, you are aware, absolutely. But there are protections in place by working with a licensed advocate, because even the process of a land transaction is regulated by the Law Society of Kenya's conditions of sale to protect both parties. So therefore, we recommend that you work with a licensed advocate. Once you do that, there are specific documents you should ask the seller for every single time without fail, starting with the title deed, original. If they can't show you the
It's the
original
first document you ask for.
yes,
Okay, the title deed.
yes,
The most useless one.
yes,
Okay.
because it's simply the starting point.
Okay.
And so with the title deed, you can then dig deeper and ascertain that this title deed is founded on actual documents legally recognized and the property actually exists. Because even in the absence of the original, you can have a copy. With a copy, you can go to the registry and ask for certain things. If they can't show you the original, ask them for a certified copy, not just a copy, because I could manufacture one to misrepresent facts. Same goes for their identification documents, ID, PIN certificate. If it's a company, obviously, certificate of incorporation and that sort of thing. Along with that, you must ask them if it was subdivided from a larger parcel, which is majority of the case today. Then you must ask them for a mutation form, a certified copy, not just
A mutation form.
mutation form. That is a document that illustrates how this particular piece of land was created from the larger mother parcel. Along with the mutation form, you require the registry index map. It must be updated and also certified by the Department of Survey, so that you're sure that you're looking at authentic documentation. And with those, then you can hire a licensed surveyor to do the groundwork for you.
Standard 2 kid is lost, man.
I'm not in standard 2.
Start
and I'm
with
feeling a little
title
bit
deed,
dizzy.
then from title deed you get mutation form, then along the mutation form you get what else?
Registry index
The
map.
registry index map.
Then something
Yes.
from the Department of
And all these things are
Survey.
coming from the person who's selling you the piece of land. That means
They
that when you
must.
own the land, you must have all these documents with you.
Precisely.
If you ever hope to sell this piece of land.
If you hope to sell it legitimately in a manner that is required. Most of our sellers don't. And this is part of the problem. This is why we have fraud, because you have incomplete sets of documentation that one can manipulate and this, that, or the other. So this is the reason we ended up saying that, listen, there's a bunch of documents a lot more important than the title deed. And you must have those in order to be sure that you can trust the title deed and its ownership.
Solomon, are you seriously saying that everybody who owns a piece of land today in this country, they bought this land legitimately? If you went to the land registry, you'll find that their title deed is legitimate. There are no double or triple claims to this piece of land. Every legitimate homeowner in this country would have these documents with them. A title deed, a mutation form, registry map, and plus the others that you're going to tell us.
They may not have them with them, but they do exist.
Okay. And
That's
they
our
ought to have
assumption.
them with them.
They ought to, absolutely.
So you're saying that if they own land and they don't have them, they may just have been fortunate in there not having been an issue.
Exactly.
And that if they were more knowledgeable, they ought to have asked for this because these are things which are necessary.
Yes, they pre-exist the title deed.
Where? It's a learning curve. Okay. So we are at 3 documents, and we started with, let's just start with get the title deed. It just shows you, all right, Solomon owns this piece of land. But beyond that, to make sure that Solomon actually does own this piece of land, this piece of land actually does exist in law, is where now we're going to these other documents. The land buying transaction. Let's take a break. We continue the conversation shortly after this break. Solomon Wangwe is a founder and managing director of Goshen Acquisitions Limited. Please remind me the brand name.
Grand Acres.
Grand Acres. Grand Acres, right?
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day. Roby.
Director of Goshen Acquisitions Limited. And he's here to prosecute the case. Why the title deed is the most useless document in a land buying transaction. So he says, all right, you want to buy a piece of land, the first thing that you ought to do is identify and hire the services of a registered lawyer. You can find out if one is registered by going to the LSK website and find out, yes, that their status is present, current. They can show you their law degree, their photo of them being admitted to the bar. That doesn't matter.
Even
This
if
year.
it's a photo with the entire clan,
Yes.
it doesn't matter.
On that day, with the Chief Justice standing next. This is the day I was admitted to the bar.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What's your current status? Number 1. Number 2, now you tell the lawyer, start doing these things. And you ought to know what your lawyer ought to be doing. So ask the person who's selling you a piece of land for a copy of the original or certified copy of the title deed.
Yes.
Next, ask that person for a mutation form. Also ask for a registry
Index map.
index map. What is that?
So the registry index map is the final authority, map authority. In actual fact, today, the only reason people can access mutation forms is because registry index maps have not yet been updated. The mutation form illustrates how the property was subdivided from whatever existed before it. Okay, that document is filed at the Department of Survey, the relevant office. They're now devolving those offices, but once the title deed has been produced, what is supposed to happen is the district surveyor sends a forwarding letter to the provincial surveyor asking them to update the registry index map, which is essentially a map for the larger area, not just for that particular piece of land. A registry index map will show you who the neighbors are, their title reference numbers, any access roads and shapes, and precise location as relates to the general locality, right? That document must be updated. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for future problems. Now, once a document is updated, the registry index map, the mutation form becomes inaccessible. It's just that we, in the process of subdividing land, are very keen to obtain copies along each step of the way, just so that we have historical documentation for how we arrived at what we're selling you. But generally speaking, the mutation form would only be available to you if the registry index map has not been updated. But it ought to be. In fact, on the back of every title, there's an endorsement done by the senior lands registrar for that purpose. And if that has not been done, what that means is under the new regime where they're doing title conversions, the new Ardhi Sasa initiative, where they're, in fact, in the near future, nearest possible future, if you ask them, they want to phase out physical titles. everything's going to be digital. But along that process, the registry index map becomes very critical to you getting your new generation title. So if the RIM, we call it a RIM for short, if it has not been updated, then you're setting yourself up for future issues on your ownership.
Next document.
So assuming you have the title, mutation form, registry index map, and I should point out here, those three sets I've mentioned are typically for freehold properties. Leasehold properties have a slightly different set of documentation, but they correlate. For leasehold properties, it's the certificate of title as opposed to title deed. Along with the certificate of title, you're supposed to have your deed plan, which will show you the shape and dimension and size of the specific property that goes along with the certificate of title. But if someone shows you a certificate of title without the actual lease, you should take a pause and be cautious, because the lease is what gives birth to your title. So you're supposed to have a lease along with that. That's a document that will contain all the conditions of use for that land, whether it's residential, commercial, how much space you're allowed to cover the ground with buildings, the tenure as well. So the lease is for 99 years. If you're buying it now and it's a 99-year lease, like ours is for our Naivasha project, the All Kekun, in 10 years, when I sell it to someone else, they will be buying an 89-year lease.
Yeah.
Right? And so on and so forth until it expires. Whoever owns it at that point must renew. Right? But all these documents do correlate. Assuming you have those, your lawyer should help you engage a licensed surveyor to go to the ground and confirm that the situation on the ground is exactly as the documents say, because they are not always exactly as the documents say. There's discrepancies with sizes very often, especially for freehold land. There's normal margins of error allowed. If they go beyond that, they must be corrected. And in some cases, that will mean you correct your mutation forms and obtain new titles before you can proceed. So it's very important that you get a surveyor on the ground to confirm size, dimension, and the actual location. Why that's important is because when you're looking at land and someone says, this is a beacon for this piece of land, it's next to such and such, which we have experienced before. We actually looked at a piece of land in Nanyuki about 8 years ago that we wanted to buy. It was supposedly next to a proposed golf course, which obviously was interesting for us. So the beacon, was given the titles and so on. When we sent the surveyor to ground, he identified using the registry index map and the mutation forms. He actually said, Solomon, listen, this piece of land is actually 2 kilometers from where you were shown. So it's important.
So the ground had shifted.
Literally.
Definitely.
It's likely that there was fraud in play. Someone put beacons somewhere knowing that its location next to this proposed development would cause me to jump the gun. Or very often with those flat pancake shaped beacons that are typical, they move. They do. We've bought land from people who bought the land in 1979, and by 2013 they had only been there once. So they couldn't tell you where the beacons are supposed to be. And it's possible that they can shift, not necessarily out of malice. So it's important that you have a surveyor go to the ground
Solomon,
and identify.
How would the beacons shift if they were not shifted? This is an inanimate object. Somebody has to shift it, and why would they shift it?
If not with malice.
Yes. So I'll give you some examples. There's majority of this country where you have undeveloped agricultural land. When it rains, it could flood. The soil could move. It could get carried downstream. Happens all the time.
Wait, isn't there a lay-down procedure, process, and standard for laying down a beacon?
Yes, unfortunately, that standard is not sufficient for long-term boundary demarcation.
It isn't.
No,
So what
we
is?
have found, practically speaking, it's not. We actually eventually ended up innovating ourselves, because we do sell a lot of our land to people in the diaspora. people who are classified as absentee landowners, meaning they own the land but they don't live on the land. And we didn't want a situation where we sold land to someone and the beacon moved either because of rain, or an idle herdsboy came along, found this concrete thing on the ground and decided to play with it.
Pull it
It
out,
happens
play
all the
with
time.
it.
Not out of malice, they just don't understand the import of that piece of concrete in the ground. And so we ended up creating these, we call them our signature beacons. They're about 18-inch diameter, 7 foot tall before it's put in the ground. It's steel reinforced, it's branded, it has your title reference
7
number.
foot tall.
Yes, 7 foot tall. We plant it 3.5 feet in the ground, so half of it is secured with cement underground. And you would need a bulldozer to move that thing. It weighs about 800 kilos by the time it's fabricated. And so those are some of the interventions we found we have to make, precisely because the standard, the norm, is not sufficient for.
The norm seemed to have been based on trust.
Yes, probably. In fact, before the concrete, they used to use sisal plants.
Yes.
Yeah, makonge.
Because you're present anyway.
Right.
And everybody knows that Mukonga is on the
Eric,
boundary.
people have been known to move those sisal plants at night.
Of course.
True.
So, I mean,
That's what neighbors do.
so I'm looking at all, and this is for somebody who wants to acquire land, right?
Yeah.
Now, and this is the process that you have gone through. There are those who will find this a bit of a dizzying experience in terms of, okay, I've got to go to this department of survey. I don't know. Right.
Yes.
So many people are not doing this due diligence.
Right.
So are you saying that should somebody come to Goshen, for example, tomorrow and say, look, I want to acquire a piece of land, I have to go through this whole process as well? Or are we saying that you've gone ahead and done the due diligence, and so then one must just come to you and then you can now carry them through the process?
1,000,000%. That's what we're saying. We're saying that because these are the processes that must be followed in the first place, and that we do follow them, it therefore saves you the trouble of having to go through that rigor. At the very least, we provide you the basis upon which to make simple confirmations. You don't have to hunt for the RIM or the lease or the mutation form. We provide you certified copies of every single one along with the title deed, so that your advocate simply confirms their legitimacy. And there are few companies, I can tell you that with complete confidence, very few companies who would do that besides Grand Acres or Goshen Acquisitions.
So with all these documents, once you have them, all right, and you're going and your lawyer is basically checking one by one into the next.
Yeah.
At what point do you then bring up the importance of the all-important title deed?
Yes, well, assuming you've gone through that process and confirmed the legitimacy of all the documents, there's a green card that confirms. Now, if you'll allow me, let me just say why the green card is important when you're doing your search. Most people will simply do a title search, right? In certain zones in Nairobi, you can do that online, but by and large, for most of the country, it's still manual. You have to go to the relevant registry and fill in a form, an application form. You attach a copy of the title. They ask you for your identification documents, which is ID and PIN. And then they produce a search certificate. That's what they call it. It'll tell you the status of the land. Is it clean? Is it encumbered? Is there fraud? Blah, blah, blah. Most people stop there. What we recommend for people to do is, after you do the search, get your lawyer to go back and get a certified copy of the green card. Because when you apply for a search, what the people at lands do is they go to the green card and write down on your search certificate what the green card says for now, the current status. The reason we recommend that you do that after, as opposed to simultaneously, is because we had a situation, for instance, in Kajiado about 10 years ago, where there was a cartel of fraudsters working with clerks at the registry who would say, listen, if Solo comes to do a search on this, let the search say I'm the owner. Then when I sell, me and you will split the chums.
What?
You know? And later on, when you do a certified copy of the green card, you find that the details provided to you on your search do not match what's is on the green card. And that's a massive red flag. So I always tell people, as opposed to doing them simultaneously, get the search first, then have a certified copy of the green card to confirm that the search produced to you is accurate.
What is a certified copy?
It's simply they make copies. Sometimes they will handwrite the details on a paper, and it is stamped by the senior registrar in most cases. It has to be an original stamp. It can't be a copy of a stamp. Otherwise, it's not a certified
How
copy.
do you know
How do you tell the
original?
difference?
Usually you can tell the difference between a copy of a document and its original. You can even feel the texture on the surface. Very simple.
Stamp, not
Yeah.
seal. Stamp. Stamp can be made on the street. Wataka stamp. Boss, wanataka tuandike nini? Andika registrar.
Yes.
Full of stars.
Weka date katikati.
At the registry. Very difficult for that to happen at the registry level.
Okay.
Because even when they access those files, there's an internal log about who has accessed the files. It's very difficult for the green card to get screwed around with, even though it does happen from time to time. But if you have paid the fee and you have a receipt from the cash office that you paid for this service, you're covered. If you get defrauded in that instance, legally speaking, then you could hold the government responsible for your loss because they misrepresented facts that they got paid for.
What are the red flags that you should look out for in the details of the green card?
Red flags to look for are disorderly dates. That document will have history of ownership in sequence. So when you have a date, an earlier date appearing after a later date, then there's an issue. If you have edits to the green card that are not countersigned, then you must investigate further. If it has not been certified, I would not even accept that as a reasonable point of reference. It has to be certified, accompanied by the receipt, your payment to the Ministry of Lands cash office for that certified copy. There is a fee involved, and so always ask for receipts. Simple thing, it costs you, 1,000 bob. The most expensive registry charges us 2,500 bob for a certified copy. But that thing could save you a world of pain in the future.
How long does it take to process it? From point of application going to the lands office to the point of receiving that certified copy?
Unfortunately, the answer to that is it depends. It depends on who is making the application and how diligent they are with follow-up. We've had to wait up to 2 weeks in some instances, even for searches in some registries. Some registries are more efficient than others, but we've also received certified copies within the day. So it just depends on who is doing it. Again, why you should work with a licensed advocate, because they tend to have the infrastructure to be a lot more efficient than you would on your own as an individual. Yeah.
I'm pausing because I'm thinking that what you said initially about this thing being simple, it actually is simple. But it's only simple if you have the facts. If you don't have the facts, then, my friend, it's a brave new world. You will be walking through a maze without even realizing you're walking through a maze, and you'll never really get to the end of it. And even when you think you've gotten to the end of it, you haven't. Now, when you get to the point where you've done all these things, now, is this now where the title stops being useless?
Yes, now the title means something. It's trustworthy. It's legit. It's bankable. You can deal with the bank without issue, borrow against it, leave it as an inheritance to your children or your grandchildren, or transact with it, subdivide it, add value to it. Until you have ascertained that, it's a fool's errand to proceed with that transaction. And I know it's something that people, especially in our field, and we're part of the problem. I'll be the first one to admit our industry, the land developers, the land sellers, those of us who subdivide and produce land, we are at least half the problem. Most of us will not tell you what to look for because it's not expedient.
Well with what you've done.
Yeah, it's not expedient. It's especially if you're not in the business of doing it clean, in strict adherence to the due processes. The policies are in place. They have been for years. It's not rocket science. I do look forward to the new administration, hopefully, putting a little more investment in public education around how the government is supposed to provide services so that people know what to look for.
You people have been accused, you people in that industry of yours, of buying and selling land, of subdividing this country. The map of Kenya used to be like this. Now the map of Kenya is dots. It's just Kiraka.
50 by
So
100.
50 by
broken up
100
puzzle.
everywhere, man. Go to Lam, 50 by 100. They're selling. Now, how does that, what you do, especially now that you talked about the registry index maps,
Yes.
show us that you have put into consideration, let's say you've bought a piece of land, 1,000 acres piece of land somewhere, and you're subdividing. Are you required by law, and do you actually do it, in providing services and amenities for that community that you are creating? Because you're creating a community when you're selling 1,000 acres of land and subdividing it into 50s by 100s. You're creating an
8,000
entire
households.
Yes. Are you providing for, children playgrounds, for shopping amenities, for hospitals, for schools, and for such others, accessways,
Absolutely.
and sewer?
Absolutely. So for the most part, for the last 10 years, we have primarily provided Kenyans locally and abroad land investment opportunities around speculation, right? And there's a difference. This is one of the things we tell people, and I think in a week or so we are launching our 9 steps to safe land buying in Kenya. If anyone who's interested can go to our website and register. They'll receive it for free. Just a strict guideline checklist on what to look for. It's very important that besides identifying a lawyer to work with, that you know what your goal is. So if you're buying land to settle, to build in, or to build on, so that you can live in that home, or you want to build apartments to rent, or you want to farm, those will determine what documents to look for, specifically around the subdivision, a provision of amenities. If you're buying land for speculative purposes, meaning I have 100K in the bank, it's not doing much for me, let me buy a piece of land somewhere that hopefully in 5, 10, 20 years will have appreciated in value a lot faster than the thing would have earned in interest. Your specificity about provision of sewer, roads, and that sort of thing may be a bit relaxed. But at the same time, you don't buy 50 by 100 speculatively. If you're going to buy a 50 by 100 or a quarter acre or even a half acre, it needs to come with services because you have already fragmented it and predetermined its future use. For instance, you would never imagine that you could do any meaningful sort of farming on a 50 by 100 or even a quarter or even a half. There's a saying in rural Kenya that shamba ni eka. It has to be at least an acre.
Shamba ni eka. Below that is plot.
Yes. Now, if you're going to sell me a 50 by 100 today, or if we're going to sell you a 50 by 100 today, it has to have the appropriate use already for what I have already primed it for, which is residential. So if it's currently freehold agricultural, massive red flag. There's no value for you.
Freehold agricultural 50 by 100.
Yes, I'm telling you, you can build a home, a holiday home. There's nice views of this, that, or the other. But currently, I'm giving you a freehold title that's agriculturally zoned. That's a no value proposition for you. Number one. Number two, it's suggestive that I cut shortcuts or took shortcuts in the due process. Because if you're going to subdivide or fragment pieces of land to that size, in most counties today, according to the Physical Land Use and Planning Act 2019, there are very specific things you must do before you are allowed to do that, including providing allowance for infrastructure, public community spaces, whether it's a school, a shopping center, police station, for security, your borehole site, and that sort of thing. If that's not in place, then it has been illegally subdivided, in essence.
Someone has cut at corners.
Yeah. Someone cut corners. So
Someone has said, where? Thank God for such information. And I wish many more people would have such information, just knowing what to look out for and what to go for when you're buying land. Solomon, thank you very much. I see the controversy that you wanted to create. And yes, basically what you're saying is that when you say the title deed is the most useless document, what you mean is the least important
Least important.
in that transaction.
Yes.
Okay.
It was made in context.
All right. Solomon Wangwe is the founder and managing director of Goshen Acquisitions. He's been here educating us about land acquisition in the country. If you go anywhere across the country where Solomon has pieces of land or where Solomon will be looking to buying pieces of land, you have access to 4G network thanks to Airtel. And we're giving away 2,000 bob worth of airtime thanks to Airtel. Just go to our social media Twitter handle, join most affordable network with expanded wide network coverage, and they're asking you from where are you enjoying Airtel KE? Answer, and our social media man, Amlioto Brian, will pick a winner and we'll announce a winner at the end of this. Solomon, thank you for coming. Come again.
Thank you. Most honored.
We need to have more of these conversations so that we all get to know. If you had told me, I would not have bought what I bought from this gentleman sitting right next to me.
Don't listen to this man.
Very sorry.
Still
no,
the
no,
audience
no,
of his
no.
rock. That's what he wanted. In fact,
No.
what he's not
Good
telling
morning.
them-
It's 9 a.m.